Hello, practical law students. So, this week we are going to pick up with something that we talked about several weeks ago, which is crime in America. So, what we're going to be looking at is the definition of what those crimes are. And there are two big areas that we're going to focus on: crimes against the person and then crimes against property. And then we're going to talk about defenses that you can use if you are accused of any of these crimes. All right. So, we're picking up, like I said, on a topic from a couple weeks ago: crime in America. And of course, all of this is tied to our discussion of criminal law. And that's what you had last week, was a little introduction to criminal law. So now we're going to define the crimes, and then we're going to talk about the defenses that you have if you're accused of these crimes. And we're going to start with crimes against the person. Now, as we go through the lessons this week, be sure you are taking notes. You can take notes on your own. You can jot down whatever you want to. I will try to give you some heads up with some things I want you to be sure that you get down. So just be prepared for that, but feel free to take any notes that you want as we work through these, okay? Now, when we talk about crimes against the person, we're talking about homicide, kidnapping, assault, battery, robbery, and rape. These are some of the crimes that you will receive the harshest penalties for, okay? And to be honest with you, you don't really need to take any notes on this introduction slide down. I'm just giving you an idea of where we're headed as we move through this lesson, okay? So these are some very, very serious crimes, and as a result, you're going to receive harsh penalties. The law also protects the defendant from overly harsh penalties by defining various levels of some of these crimes and by considering the circumstances of each offense. And in this first lesson, what we're going to be talking about is homicide and suicide. Okay. And with homicide, there's going to be a lot of subcategories. And that's a good example of the laws that are there that are to protect defendants against overly harsh penalties, because for it to be a homicide, certain characteristics have to be met. Okay, so let's get right into it and let's talk about what homicide is. Now, I want you to get down the first 2 points here, okay? Homicide is the killing of one human being by another. It is the most serious of all acts, okay? Be sure you get those two things down. Now, homicide can be considered either criminal homicide or non-criminal homicide. And we're going to look at criminal homicide first. For it to be criminal homicide, there has to be intent or a plan to kill. Okay, criminal homicide is committed with intent or a plan. Be sure you get that down as well. Criminal homicide could also result if your reckless actions are carried out without regard to human life, which result in the killing of another person. So even if you don't set out with the intent to kill somebody, or you have a plan to kill somebody, if you act in a reckless manner to where the result is going to be loss of life, that also counts under criminal homicide. And we'll talk more specifically about those here in just a second. Non-criminal homicide is also referred to as excusable or justifiable, and it is not subject to criminal charges. And we'll talk more about that in a second as well. Okay? So think of it as an umbrella. The overarching crime here is homicide, the killing of one person by another. And it can either be criminal or non-criminal. For it to be criminal, there has to be some sort of intent or plan, or you act in a way to where the only outcome is that you're going to take another person's life. Okay, even if you don't intend to or you plan to, your actions are going to result in loss of life. So let's look at criminal homicide. Under criminal homicide, the most serious charge is murder. Okay, be sure you get that down. Murder is killing that is done with malice. Malice is the intent to kill or seriously harm another person, or acting in an extremely reckless manner that shows a lack of regard for life. Okay? So be sure you get this down. Murder is killing that is done with malice. It is the most serious. You actually plan it out, or you're acting in a way that shows disregard for human life. Any homicide done with malice equals murder, and it is punishable by death. The idea is if you take someone's life, then you forfeit your life in return. Now, as we said in the introduction, even with murder, there are varying degrees. Okay, statutes now classify murder according to the killer's state of mind or the circumstances surrounding the crime. So let's look at that, and we'll get a little bit more specific with that. Okay, we're going to start with first-degree murder. First-degree murder is a killing that is premeditated, thought of beforehand. It is deliberate and done with malice. It is acting with an intent to kill or cause severe bodily harm. When you commit first-degree murder, you exhibit a depraved indifference to human life. Sometimes the premeditation and deliberation, when they occur, impacts the charge that you will face. But with first-degree murder, premeditation and deliberation can occur very close to the time of the homicide. Okay, it could happen minutes before, but as long as it's there, you are guilty of first-degree murder. Now, under this category of first-degree murder comes something called felony murder. A felony murder takes place during the commission of certain felonies such as arson, rape, robbery, or burglary. Okay, so when a killing takes place during the commission of certain felonies. It is not necessary to prove intent with felony murder. Why? Because malice is presumed because the homicide occurred during a felony, even if it was accidental. And the planning of the felony is the intent, okay? This is one of those situations where you are acting in such a depraved way as to not value the lives of others, okay? The fact that you're committing arson, rape, robbery, or burglary, you should very well expect somebody could lose their life in those crimes and those felonies. There's your intent, okay? Because of what you're doing, you are acting with a disregard for human life. Felony murder is first-degree murder in most states, regardless of whether malice, premeditation, or deliberation exist. Again, because you are committing a murder and that loss of life occurs because you're committing a felony and the loss of life occurs during the commission of the felony, that's enough. Okay, that's enough to bump it up to first-degree murder. Now, another possible charge is second-degree murder. Second-degree murder is a killing that is done with malice, but it's without premeditation or deliberation. The intent to kill did not exist until the moment of murder. It is considered intentional, but spontaneous killings that are unplanned. Okay, that's second-degree murder, all right? So first-degree murder is premeditated. It's thought about beforehand. Second-degree murder is not. Now, with first-degree murder, like we said, the premeditation deliberation can occur very, very close to the time of homicide. All right. So, there's a possibility that your second-degree murder could be bumped up to a first-degree murder charge. Okay. But in general, second-degree murder is a killing that is done with malice, but without premeditation or deliberation. Now, we're still under this umbrella of criminal homicide. Another possible charge is voluntary manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter is a killing that would otherwise be seen as murder, but occurs after the victim has done something to the killer that would cause a reasonable person to lose self-control or act rashly. Basically, it is killing someone without planning to do so. Now, one of the best examples of this is if you are out and you arrive home and you find your spouse cheating with you or cheating on you with someone else, and seeing them together drives you to kill one or both of them. That would be voluntary manslaughter, okay? Because you lost self control and you acted rashly. You did not have time to actually plan out the murder. Now, words alone do not reduce the severity of a murder to a voluntary manslaughter charge, and the killing must occur after the provocation. So you don't have a time to cool down. So if you come home and you find your spouse cheating on you, okay, and you leave and you go away and you come back and you kill them, nope, that's not voluntary manslaughter, okay, because you had a cool down period, you left. It's got to be instantaneous. Voluntary manslaughter tends to be punished somewhat less severely as a concession to the frailty of human character. Okay? People can understand, I came home, I saw my spouse cheating on me, and I snapped. Okay? They can understand that. Other people would sympathize and be like, yeah, I could see myself doing that too. Okay? So that's why voluntary manslaughter is punished somewhat less severely as a concession to the frailty of human character. Now, usually does not mean you're going to get off. You're going to face probably life in prison, but you might not face the death penalty. Okay. Now, with voluntary manslaughter, you also have involuntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter is a killing in which there is no intent to kill at all. It is the unintentional killing resulting from conduct so reckless that it causes extreme danger to death or bodily injury. Okay. For example, playing with a gun known to be loaded. You should always expect the gun to be loaded. You should expect that if the gun goes off, you could hurt somebody. You could even take their life, even though you do not intend to do that when you're playing with it. Okay. You don't even know if it's loaded, but you should expect it to be. Okay. So that's an example of involuntary manslaughter, is playing with a gun known to be loaded. The last charge under this criminal homicide umbrella is called negligent homicide. Negligent homicide is causing death through criminal negligence. And you need to know what negligence is. Negligence is a failure to exercise reasonable or ordinary amount of care in a situation, thereby causing harm to someone. Okay. It sometimes is classified as involuntary manslaughter. Now, the most common form of negligent homicide is vehicular manslaughter, okay, which is a killing that results from operating a motor vehicle in a reckless or grossly negligent manner. If you are found not guilty of negligent homicide, do not assume you can get off, okay, because you could face civil charges for damages. Okay, so even if you get off from criminal charges, you could face civil charges as well. It is usually not considered a criminal offense unless death results from gross negligence. All right, and some of your drunk driving statutes fall under negligent homicide. Okay, if you get behind the wheel of a car, you should realize that your actions getting drunk, okay, there's your um, there's your inability to exercise reasonable ordinary amount of care in the situation. You should realize that your actions could result in death of somebody, and the fact that you are using this heavy vehicle, that if it hits somebody, it could cause damage and could cause loss of life. That's another example of negligent homicide. Okay, this idea of vehicular manslaughter. Okay, now, so that pretty much covers it for criminal homicide. Non-criminal homicide, they're not considered crimes at all. They are justified and excusable, and the killer is deemed faultless. Now, what would possibly be examples for those? Well, killing an enemy during times of war, or killing by a police officer of a person committing a serious crime or who poses a threat of death or serious harm. And I know this is very, very controversial with events that happened over the summer, but that's the idea. Okay, so if you kill somebody during war, or you're a police officer and you kill somebody who is committing a crime and possibly threatening other people as well, that would be non-criminal homicide. Now, I will say that if an investigation occurs, okay, in either one of those areas, and it is deemed that you purposely killed somebody with intent and stuff like that, non-criminal homicide comes off the table. Okay, so if there's an investigation, this even happens in times of war. Okay, all of a sudden this prisoner dies in custody and stuff like that, and there's a group of soldiers standing around, probably not excusable. Okay, especially if the person has been subdued. Okay, probably not excusable. So if an investigation occurs, it is very, very possible that the non-criminal homicide charge comes off the table and we move into criminal homicide. Okay. Also, a killing performed in self-defense or in defense of another could be considered non-criminal homicide. Okay, so if somebody breaks into your house and you are trying to protect yourself or your family, it is possible that it will be considered non-criminal homicide. Again, there's probably going to be an investigation, and if something comes up, the non-criminal homicide might come off the table. All right, but in general, these are killings that are justifiable or excusable. Now, the last thing that we want to talk about with this lesson today is the act of suicide. Okay, believe it or not, well, we know that suicide is the deliberate taking of one's life. And believe it or not, it was once considered a crime. Now, don't ask me how it's going to be punished if it is successful, because by then you're already dead. All right. The charge, I think, comes from those who attempted to kill themselves but were not successful. Okay. Now, and you could be punished. You could be locked away. Now, usually you would probably be sent to some sort of mental institution or a mental hospital or something like that, but you could be punished for it. All right. Today, attempted suicide is seen as a plea for help. Okay. And instead of punishing the person, we do things like we have psychological exams and other treatments like counseling. And someone who helps another person commit suicide can be found guilty of a crime of murder or manslaughter. Okay, Dr. Kevorkian several years ago was charged, for murder and manslaughter and helping terminally ill patients commit suicide. All right, so that there's another way that we can use this crime to prosecute others. One of the reasons that we talk about suicide in this class is because it is a serious problem in society. There's about one suicide every 15 minutes in the country. Typically, there are far more suicides than homicides per year. So, because of that, like I said, we take some time and we talk about it here in this class. Another reason that we do is because it tends to impact the teen population. Okay, teen suicides and attempted suicides are considered serious public health problems. Some individuals simply need someone to talk to who can help them see positive alternatives to ending their lives, which is where the counseling comes in. It's not necessarily that you're going to be locked up in a mental hospital or anything like that anymore. We just want people to get help. So if you or somebody that you know is facing suicide or contemplating suicide, please reach out to help or for help. Okay. The Youth National Crisis Hotline is 1-800-442-HOPE. And there's also www.suicidehotlines.com, which has a directory for hotlines in every state. Okay. Also, please reach out to your teachers, reach out to your counselors, because this is a serious health problem and a serious public health concern. We want people to get help. We don't want you to feel stigmatized. We certainly do not consider it a crime anymore. So please, if you're dealing with any issues or you know somebody who is dealing with issues and has discussed suicide or talked about suicide, please reach out for help, because we want to get people help and not face the negative consequences. All right. So those are our first two crimes against the person: homicide and suicide. Suicide is the deliberate taking of one's life by oneself. Okay. Homicide is the taking of somebody else's life by somebody else. With homicide, you have criminal homicide and you have non-criminal homicide. And under criminal homicide, you have first-degree murder, second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter. There are all these differing categories based on differing conditions like intent and whether or not it's deliberate and things like that. Okay. Where we're headed with the next lesson is we're going to talk about things like kidnapping, assault and battery, rape, other crimes against the person. And then later this week, we're going to start looking at crimes against property as well.